Hi Sodbusters! I want to show you just how easy it can be to start keeping bees on Layens frames even if all you have is Langstroth equipment. If you've been watching videos on this channel for any period of time, you probably know by now that I am partial to keeping bees in Layens horizontal hives. Layens hives use a deep frame that is not compatible with Langstroth equipment. The Langstroth frame is 19 inches long. The Layens frame is about 14 inches wide, so they don't work out. You can't hang them in the same box. Or can you? If you're watching this video right now, maybe you have some interest in starting to keep bees in Layens hives, or maybe you've already started keeping bees in Layens hives, but now you have a surplus of Langstroth equipment and you're trying to figure out what to do with it. Let me show you how you can make a Layens hive out of some Langstroth boxes. Now I want to be clear that this video is about the hardware that you use to keep the bees in. I'm not going to discuss how to take your bees that might already be on Langstroth frames and do that conversion to get those bees into a Layens hive. That's a separate subject. This is about reusing your Langstroth hardware to make yourself Layens hives. As I mentioned, the Langstroth frame is 19 inches long and, as it should, fits perfectly lengthwise in a Langstroth box. A Layens frame is not that wide. You can see the difference pretty readily here. There's several inches difference between the two frames. And so obviously that frame is not going to hang on the frame rails in the Langstroth box. But the width of the Langstroth box is just slightly wider than the Layens frame, and we can use that to our advantage. Doing this conversion is very simple, requires very basic carpentry skills, and depending on how much customization you do, is completely reversible. I'm doing this with two deep boxes. These are about 9.5 inch deep boxes, generally used for brood boxes in the Langstroth hive. And you can do this with different boxes. I have done it with a deep, a shallow, and a spacer. I had a friend who built these from 3 medium boxes. As long as they're deep enough for the Layens frame, you'll be all right. And all we need to do is tie these boxes together and make a frame rest on the long side of the box, which we're going to do both of those with 1/2 inch plywood. Measure from the bottom of the box up to the frame rest for the Langstroth frames. And that should be standard, but I recommend measuring this, whatever boxes you use, because there may be a little variation depending on what brand of boxes you use or who made your boxes. And we're looking at, well, about 18 and 9/16 right there. And then we want the length of those boards to be from the inside of the box to the inside, not the inside of this rabbit here, but the inside of the box itself. And that is just at 18 3/8. So we'll cut it just a little shy of that. We don't necessarily need to make it a tight fit. We just want to basically cover this inside here. Once you have your cuts made, then all you need to do is fit your pieces in. And it looks like I've cut this one just a little bit short because it's not even with the frame rest on the end. And it's not critical that the frame rest on the side matches the frame rest on the end. But it is important that the frame rest on this side matches the frame rest on the other side. And the easiest way to make sure that's even is to match it up with the rests on the end. So that's not a problem. We'll just get our screws started, lift it up just a tiny bit so it's even, and then screw it the rest of the way in. Now as you're putting your screws in, best practice is of course to drill a pilot hole. But as long as you are not too close to the end, and as long as your screws aren't so long that they're going to go all the way through the wood, then you should be fine. You do want to be mindful of where your handle is. So because the handles are cut into the box on the Langstroth box, that wood's going to be thinner right where the handle's at. So you want to make sure not to put a screw in there, because it's certainly going to poke through that thinner wood on the outside. So we'll put this screw a little higher. An alternate way of screwing these together is to lay the box on its side, so you can just lay the plywood down on the side. You want to make sure that your boxes are pulled together snugly. After screwing this plywood on one side, I have a little bit of a gap. For some reason it's pulled a little bit of a gap open on the opposite side. Maybe a little bit of a warp in the plywood or whatever is causing that. So a good thing to have are some cabinet maker's clamps, and if you don't have these, you could run a strap around the boxes just to pull them together tight until you get this plywood in place. One recommendation I will make as you put this plywood in, and this may run counter to your sense of the aesthetic, but I would recommend putting the plywood in so that the rougher side of the plywood is to the inside of the box, so that's what's showing. In other words, you're putting the more finished side of the plywood up against the wood of the box. And the reason for that is the rougher the wood is in here, the more likely bees are to coat that with propolis, and that propolis layer is going to help provide an antiseptic environment for the bees. With those plywood sides put on the inside of the Langstroth box, now you have a 12 frame Layens hive. That's really all there is to it. Your Layens frames, although they won't fit this way obviously, they will fit very neatly. Turn 90 degrees to the original Langstroth orientation. You can find plans on horizontalhive.com for a divider board. It's just very basic. You're cutting a board out of plywood. And I will actually put the dimensions for the divider board on the screen here so that you'll have those to reference. But other than that, that is it. Now the frames will slide back and forth. There's a little bit of play there, but not enough that they're going to fall off of those frame rails. If you want to, you could put little spacers on each side, but the problem with that is as moisture builds up in the hive, and I can tell you this from experience, those spacers can tend to swell up and then your frames get wedged in there. Obviously your Layens hive is going to need to have a lid and an entrance, and you can do that many ways. You could build a floor onto the hive and cut a new entrance into the front, or you could just use a Langstroth bottom board and use the entrance coming in on the end of the hive. As for a lid, you can make a fancy hinged lid or whatever you like to do, but why not just use a standard Langstroth lid? This is a migratory lid. I prefer a telescoping lid, but whatever works. And do you really need to use an inner cover? Well, I don't use an inner cover on most of my hives that are converted from Langstroth, and it doesn't really seem to be as necessary since the bees don't come up through the frames as they do on a Langstroth. Because the frames don't go all the way to the bottom, there are a couple inches below the frames at the bottom of the hive. And so you could cut a couple inches off of your bottom box if you wanted to. I have some conversion hives that have about 3 inches at the bottom of the frames, and occasionally the bees will build on the bottom of the frames, but not too often, to be honest, and it really hasn't been that much of a problem. One recommendation I would make about an entrance. In a hive that I built, I cut an entrance right in the middle, and I don't recommend that. I found that in the Layens hive it's a little more challenging to manage the brood area in the hive. So I would recommend, if you don't use a Langstroth bottom board, instead you cut your own entrances, that you put entrances closer to each end, and then close up whichever entrance you're not using. One other thing to consider about your Layens hive is that it is a 12 frame hive. It has the equivalent space of 2 Langstroth deeps, and over the course of a year a strong colony is going to outgrow that space. So a 12 frame hive is not necessarily an optimal permanent location for a colony through the course of a season. But a 12 frame hive is great for making splits or maintaining a resource colony. And if you wanted to make a longer hive, you could cut the ends out of some Langstroth boxes and attach them together with longer pieces of plywood to make a long hive, a 24 frame hive. One other downside of this conversion is that it is not an insulated hive, which I tend to prefer insulated hives. I believe the bees manage their resources better when they aren't fighting temperature shifts as much. I found that in my insulated hives the bees tend to use a lot less honey over winter. But can bees survive over winter in a non-insulated hive? Well, certainly. And can they live in a non-insulated hive? Well, the number of people that keep bees in Langstroth hives tells that story. So I would not stress over that. And if you are, you can always add more wood on the outsides to provide more thermal mass. So if you are converting to Layens hives or considering trying out Layens hives and have some Langstroth boxes and you're trying to figure out what to do with those, I hope this gives you a good solution for how you might use those for your Layens equipment with very little additional expense. I said earlier that this video isn't about converting bees from Langstroth hives to Layens hives, but I did put together a playlist showing a conversion hive that I built to do just that. You can check out that playlist here. You also might like this video that Google has selected especially for you. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.